101 review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is Emmy Award winning visibility strategies, media advisor, and talent brand builder, as well as a podcast host. No other than Mr. Vinnie Potestivo. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Vinny, and can you
Yeah.
please introduce more about yourself?
Thanks. Yeah, it's good to be here in the playroom of creativity. It sounds like so. I appreciate the fun, jovial energy around creating visibility and being seen for your expertise and being seen for where you want to be, and also taking control over that visibility. It's really important to me that you know you can take control over that visibility. I come from a long line of cable and television programming and being an executive at many different networks from the mid 90s to now, and have used those platforms in the era of television to help brands and celebrities take control and reposition their brands through narrative, through reality television programming. Punked, The Osbournes, Newlyweds, The Housewives of New Jersey. I've had a good, successful run in helping people who own their brands and control their narrative, get their narrative told and sold. And if there's anything you learn from me today, especially whether you're writing a book, you're a speaker, you're an expert who speaks about a topic, we're going to talk about how to get you more visibility. And these are things that I do at scale with the big celebrities and big brands that also cost nothing. So this is like not something that's gonna. This is not the most expensive project, the most expensive episode you ever watched. There's zero cost, but hopefully we can increase your prices. That's the goal.
Yes,
So no cost, but price.
indeed. Indeed. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world, Mr. Vinny Potestivo. So let's talk about podcast guesting.
Sure.
We need to empower each other because we are a podcaster. Let's talk about the foundation of podcast guesting. What exactly is a podcast guesting and why it's become such a powerful strategy?
I can't. There's not one client that I'm working with that I can't strongly recommend that they lean into podcast guesting as part of their visibility growth system. I mean, I can put you on television and I can put you in the news and I can get an article written about you and I can certainly get, things in social media out about you, but being able to, as a podcaster, create content and to show up with somebody like Daniel, for example, who owns the content. Daniel has full control and final say of the edit. Yeah, we're going live, but the way we're going live is Daniel's saying and doing. And what happens after this live is Daniel's saying and doing. Daniel, I mentioned to you, I come from like MTV and Bravo and A&E. No one in the room has final say. In television, it's a collective. It's like the higher you got to go up really high up. And also, TV networks in America are on the public stock exchange. They have advisory boards. So, like, when I tell you the final say is really high up when it comes to creating content in the broadcast universe versus the narrow cast and podcast universe of podcasting. So, as a guest, I show up in Daniel's space. He has full control over the space, full control over the edit. He and I are two people collaborating on a project he owns, right? So suddenly the pieces are a lot smaller and a lot easier to start moving around. I have a lot of trust with Daniel. We've connected in a really meaningful way. Right now, I'm exclusively booking myself on podcasts on Podmatch. Podmatch is this brilliant website that connects podcasters to opportunity. One of those opportunities is podcast guests get to meet podcast hosts, but podcast hosts also have quizzes and support and workflows and masterminds and like so much access to community through Podmatch. It connects you to so much. But as a podcast guest, I'm trying to make an impact in this community. And if I tried to make an impact in the podcasting world by taking myself out to be on all the big podcasts or on as many podcasts as I can in a podcast universe that's expanding as fast as it is, I don't feel like I would make as big of a splash as I have been able to do it in a smaller community called Podmatch that has 13,000 people who are paying, guests and hosts who are paying to be on this platform. The paying part is important. You know, there are a lot of free options that are out there. When you pay, you show up. It's like why I love working on LinkedIn, because a lot of LinkedIn accounts, you're paying at least $30 a month almost to lean into creating opportunity. You show up with different intention. The intention matters. Podcast guesting, it's like social media. It's some of my clients, it's their entire social media, because we're picking podcasters who we know create a lot of content that they first post on social, then collaborate with us, and then give us to be able to repurpose. And we're intentional. I'm not waiting around for content. I know it's coming. So I'm not going to repurpose content. I'm going to pre-purpose it. I'm going to take the time to make a connection with a group of people or brands or platforms or newsletters or clubs or communities or pods, whatever, wherever you want to find it. I'm going to find the people who are going to support me. And then I'm going to create the content with podcasters to help us grow. Yeah, thank you.
Indeed, beautifully articulated, Mr. Vinny. Very well said. In your experience, what makes someone great podcast guest?
Oh, okay. So a great podcast guest is prepared to make sure that the visibility you bring to the answers, make sure that the pronunciation, the focus, the antithesis, the purpose of all of your answers revolves around the thing you can do to show up the best. You're going to have questions based on what you know to ask. I'm going to have answers based on how I know best to support. For example, I did build a platform called ihaveapodcast.com. If you're watching right now, Daniel is giving you a first glimpse of how I'm able to take my podcasts. I had a podcast
Yes.
with Beyonce and her father, the drummer, the bassist from Simple Plan, Miss USA. I'm able to take this collection of information and put it in a place where I still can focus on new podcasters. And I have podcasters come out, fill a form out where I can write an article about you to take that out. And I have the intention, Daniel, of meeting you as a guest. And what I'll say to you, by the way, we'll have this conversation after the call, but I'll tell you now. Here's a little bit of strategy. So if you were to go to ihaveapodcast.com/interview right now, you'll see the link
Yes.
that I'm going to send to you. And I'm going to say,
Yes.
look, I would love to feature you. And it costs me nothing. You fill out the form, my team puts the article together, and we publish it. And guess what? I'm also a Google News publisher, verified source. I'm an Apple certified publisher. So I've gone out of my way to make sure that my content is propagated and syndicated, not just published. And that's really powerful when you lean into the power of, so propagation, by the way, just means I take my content and I pitch it everywhere. I'm taking one liners. Maybe you've watched the news and you see the news quote a podcast. How do you think that
Yes.
podcast quote got there? You think someone was scouring the internet and they saw this perfect quote out of the middle of nowhere and decided to air it because the quote was so brilliantly marketed? And hey, maybe, maybe.
Maybe.
But chances are that's not true. Chances are, you know why I would say maybe? Because that's a resource. And if you don't trust who the source is on news, then you can't use that resource. That's the difference in being a source and being a resource. And the podcasting guests who show up as the source, so that this episode that you and I are, Daniel, this episode that you and I are creating right now, if people have a podcast and you're looking to grow, this is the source that you can come to and take a lot from it. For example, you don't need more episodes to get more visibility. You need more distribution. When you
Yes.
launched your podcast, you took the RSS link and you went to Spotify and Apple and you gave it to those platforms and you said, ping my address so when I publish new articles, it shows up. Have you taken your RSS link out recently to, I don't know, the hundreds of new podcast networks and platforms that are out globally?
Globally.
I mean, English spoken podcast in America being listened to in Ireland, in India, and Australia and UK. As technology grows, Podcast grows way quicker than broadcast. It's way easier to get a file into someone's ears than it is to get a broadcast, the rights to, television, and then the bandwidth to be able to get it out. The bandwidth to be able to get it out there. That's where the real gift in being a podcast guest is. I can do way more as a podcast guest than I could if I was focused solely on just television.
Mr. Vinny, what's the biggest mistake potential guests make when pitching to be on a podcast?
Oh, they start with what makes them great. They start the pitch with, "I'm the best. This. I'm a TEDx X59er, 56er, 7BL, and I have a 6.5 degree." They start. It's all about proof, 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 proof. Look, I know this for a fact that the clearest, cleanest, best way to a friendship is to have shared experiences. So I lean into that as my entry point. So as I mentioned, I use Podmatch to meet with podcasters. Podmatch actually gives me the ability to come up with 10 keywords that I want to talk about. And then based on the podcaster's 10 keywords, then we get matched almost like a dating site. Like there's chemistry involved, right? So there's intention and it matches us. And I have the same exact template that I use for every single pitch. Some people don't agree with that. I agree in do the work, find a way to describe yourself that applies to everybody, where you never need to change your pitch letter except for to who it's going to. You can maybe add a little customization up on top if you really want to. I really strongly advise you not to. I would actually beg for you not, if you feel called that you need to customize it on top, just then trust yourself, hold on to that gift, wait for them to reply, and then use it. You know what I mean? But they talk about themselves. I say, "Daniel, we matched."
Yes,
We matched. I put words
we
down, you
did.
put words down, and Podmatch said that we should connect. Now, I talk about visibility because visibility is important to me. And I think that, people need to be seen and heard, and words need to be seen and heard, and sometimes invented. In fact, I have a TV career that proves that I did that. Punked and Osborne's and Newlyweds. These are businesses that I put on TV that were owned by people, and helping people get seen is the thing that I learned how to do. I had to do it in TV back then because that's where those people went, and that's how media got made through the gatekeepers. I do it differently now because media is different. So Daniel, I want to know, like, what, like, when you think of a potential podcast episode with us, and like the best way that we can show up together, is visibility something that would help? Because like I want to customize that message for you. That's literally my pitch. I'm not even saying I'm an Emmy award winning blah 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 executive producer of a bazillion shows and like $17 billion and grown on each media platform that I've ever worked on. I'm not focusing on any part of that. That's not relatable to us. What's relatable to us is we matched.
Yes,
That's the
we
like we did it.
match.
That's the thing. And by the way, I talk about my TV world. I just dropped a couple of cool show. Hopefully, all y'all out there are familiar with some of those shows because my social
Yes.
clout depends on it. But I'm harping and I'm pulling up nostalgia. I'm bringing up shared experience. I'm not telling you how great I am because I won at producing and creating some of the biggest shows in modern television history. I'm calling out that I was in the room when they were created and you were in the room when they first premiered, and we have something in common. And we can talk about that because I know what happened off camera. You know what happened on camera. I don't know what happened in your room. You don't know what happened in my room. That's the way I approach it. I'm not using it again to position myself. And this is where people get it wrong. And they get it wrong on their LinkedIn profiles as well. They think that they need to prove that they have experience instead of proving that they are the experience. The people who win are the people who are the experience. You sell a TV show, you sell a sponsor, you sell an opportunity to a brand when you're the source. You sell that before you walk into the room because they're willing to work with you. And by the way, it's going to change. Whatever it is they buy, it's going to change. But do they want to work with you? If you're the source, yeah, you'll have lots of ideas. If you're a resource, you might have one or two ideas. If you're a resource, that's not as powerful as being the source. There's still power in being
Well,
the resource if it's intellectual.
yes. Mr. Vinny, very well said. Beautifully articulated. So let's talk about the preparation and approach. Being a podcast guest, can you
Yeah.
share an example of a really memorable or standout guest and why they made an impact?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I thought you were going to ask a slightly different question. My hand started to get a little bit wet. I thought you were going to ask what makes a great podcast guest. I just wanted to answer that because I thought you were going to say that. When I started
Sure,
podcast
go
guesting,
ahead.
and I do over 200 podcast guest appearances a year. When I started podcasting, my hands would get so sweaty because I was so self conscious about being on camera. It looked like I
Yes.
was in the pool all day. I had to go to the doctor and I got medicine to make my hand get dry and it dried out my mouth too. I would get those little white things on the gross little white things on the side of your mouth. And I went to the doctor. I turned to medicine to make my hand stop sweating. And it was one podcast host who turned to me and said, Vin, you just got to do the work. You're wonderful as you show up. Just be okay with how you are and show up how you are and don't sweat it so much. And then you won't sweat so much. And I had to do the work to be okay, with my, I have a long history of being near the camera and off the camera. But until they put these microphones in front of the camera recently in podcasting, I was very comfortable to be off camera. A lot of it because of, the conditioning around me and the limiting belief system that I was sort of pushed into based on what everyone else's goals were for them, not for me. So taking control over your narrative, knowing that we're shifting from a world where our image is perception, like our image is perceived, our image is implicit, it's implied, like I'm an expert, and the implication of me being an Emmy Award winner is proof implies that I am an expert. This is this world of like implication that we're sort of like that we're coming from, and where we're going to is explicit information. Like ChatGPT and Bing and AI don't know what what is implied in winning an Emmy award that makes me an expert. It knows the data point of me winning an Emmy award. That's an explicit data point that it knows about me, and it looks at me as an entity, and the Emmy Award as an entity, which is also connected to the Academy of Arts and Sciences or televisions, depending on which academy you pay for. But you have to pay for all those academies to be in them to be eligible, to pay more money, to thank them for the consideration of being nominated to win.
Yes.
It's an ecosystem that's there. The best brands are the ones that have boundaries and are willing to work with other brands, as built as beautifully and strong as they are. And when you know those access points, and being a podcast guest is literally that, knowing the access points. Like I, as a podcast guest, I don't think about me being a visibility expert and am I right for you to be in your show? I think, well, gosh, how can Daniel talk about visibility to his audience in a way that I can actually add c- considerably to? I'm thinking about how do you bring visibility into your world as opposed to where I think most guests think, how can I bring my world into yours? I don't want to bring my world into yours. By the way, I have a community. Come join my community. It's free.
Yes.
creatorhubpro.com. Come join my community. We'll put the notes in the bio. But like I believe that visibility and the information around it should be accessible to the people who need it. My entire career is predicated on that. So I'm very happy when I say and proud to be able to sit in the privilege that I worked for, to say I built something that we can all be in and we can all grow in. That's a gift. And Daniel, you owning your podcast and creating this hour of content is what makes the podcast space keep growing so much bigger and bigger because you own it, as opposed to those celebrities and TV shows I mentioned that are owned by the networks, not by the people.
So, Mr. Vinny, let's talk about guesting strategy and value. How can a podcast guesting help someone build their brand,
Yeah.
business, or
Okay.
thought leadership?
It's brilliant. So first off, I want to point out that content doesn't build leadership, positioning does. So I don't look at podcasts as a low end way to get my content out because it's cheaper to get content out. I look at it as a way to position myself in front of a podcaster who probably has never met the celebrities that I've met, who's probably never worked with the world class leaders that I've worked with, who probably can't share the same stories that I share with. I look for those people to be the number one. You know, I look at a lot of podcast strategy, and it focuses on being in the podcasts that have the most visibility. And visibility, when visibility is tied to time, time is a bandit. Yes, you will have instant visibility, but if you don't have hundreds of podcast episodes with your name in the title, you're going to be really hard to be found. And let me tell you what happens when you go on one of the top 10 podcasts that are out there. Chances are they're not going to put your name in the title of the episode. They're going to say visibility expert, Oh, my pet peeve is what's the word? Ex MTV or whatever, something that has to
Yes.
call out my path. By the way, you can call me X anything. Why would you put X in over it? I'm still an MTV executive. I have two shows, Wildin' Out and The Challenge. I have very long running franchises on that network still too. I take pride in that. Thank you. But we build content to be franchisable. We build it to be sustainable. These are the ways that I do it. I also don't build content with an audience in mind. I don't build content for an archetype of a person that I don't know. I build content for myself, and I trust myself to build content that I think the people that I'm surrounded with give a about. And if you don't, then like why are you around me? Because I don't want to change the things that I'm talking about because you don't like what I'm talking about. So I really lean into my vocabulary. So when I hear some people say, "Oh, I don't want to go on that podcast," that doesn't make sense. That's an educational podcast. Why would I go on that podcast? Well, we were all in school at some point, one version of it or another. I mean, that's a shared experience, and that's literally what I'm looking for. And you'll find that in shared experiences, that's where you'll find shared audiences. And shared audiences, when combined, is what makes your community. And if we're in the creator community right now, I promise you what happens next is either the curator economy, where we reward the people who have curated all the AI lists and they've gone through all the mishigosh and make it make sense for us. And we trust people, not things. So I trust people's curation. So the curator economy or the community economy. The curator economy will be where nurturing happens. The curator economy will be where conversion happens. The community economy will be where growth and distribution happens. And there'll be a separation. And influencers and creators will have different roles and responsibilities in those ecosystems. Podcasters falling in the creator side because we do have more intellectual property rights than the creatives who work for television do. So I'm really leaning into the people who own their content and can grow with it. And like Daniel, this has been an awesome conversation. You know, us collaborating on something like this, especially when I feel like I've said something well or finally was able to articulate something. I love being able to go to you and collaborate with you and say, "Hey, can I take this episode and put it in my creator hub?" And like I want to give a little bit more examples, and I can nurture I could nurture the results of this episode differently than if I were to focus on only posting it on social media. Imagine. But here I'm telling you how I'm going to support it over and over again. And as a guest, I show up like it's Thanksgiving, a holiday dinner. I have to show up with like I need to know what your kids are up to. I need to know what clubs you're in. I'm gonna bring goodie bags because I want to leave. I want to leave with leftovers. I come prepared. I come prepared,
Yes.
and that's what guests need to do. Be prepared. So when I say go to vpe.tv/gift or go to creatorhubpro.com to get my free support, like that's me showing up being ready. And we talked about getting on IMDb. We talked about winning awards. These are things I literally teach people how to do step by step in those systems.
Very well said, Mr. Vinny. Very well said. And to wrap up our discussion for today, what advice would you give to someone trying to get booked on more shows?
Yeah, all right. Come up with a great pitch idea, and that pitch idea does not need to be out of this world. It needs to be
Out of
out
this world.
in this world, right? So
Yes.
your pitch doesn't have to break through barriers, and it doesn't need to be the uh Hawaii. What's that Hawaiian punch? It doesn't need to be the Hawaiian punch guy. Break.
Hawaii.
Oh yeah, breaking through the walls. It doesn't need to break the universe. It needs to be out in the universe. And just trust yourself that you are the value. Your words are not the value. Your experiences are not the value. Those are ways you demonstrate your value, but you are the value. Daniel, I showed up to this recording today and I was so excited to connect with you because of you and the conversations you've had in the past. When you create the space to attract what you truly believe in and you have that energy out, there's a universal law that says energy out, energy in. I have tremendous success in casting and finding stars, not because I went looking for them. I told them where I was. MTV, come find me. It was a good address, by the way. Don't get me wrong.
Yes.
But that's why the address matters. In a couple of months from now, when every podcaster has their mid-form content on Netflix, because Netflix will soon let us have our own Netflix accounts the same way we have Instagram accounts and YouTube
Wow.
accounts. Imagine how sexy that would be for us who have mid-form
Awesome.
content. Amazon Prime used to
Interesting.
do that before the pandemic. Amazon Prime used to be the place where I would go to put all of this type of Zoom lock
Yes.
footage, two people behind a mic, four people behind a mic, sort of setup camera. Amazon Prime let that happen before they needed to clean that so that they can make way for a subscription model where they can create Oscar winning and Academy Award winning films and ultimately charge a premium membership for their platform. But they weren't going to do that with a bunch of podcast content. But on Netflix, where you can get SVOD, AVOD, advertiser video on demand, subscriber video on demand, a little mixture of both. Moral of the story is create what you can, not what you should. There's
Yes.
going to be more networks that come out. Don't create now based on what the opportunity for now is. Create now what you can, not what you should. Lean into being yourself. And thank you so much, Daniel, for the space.
Mr. Vinnie Potestivo, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your projects and, of
Yeah,
course, your
absolutely.
podcast?
Yeah, the best way to support me, if you know how to listen to podcasts, when you hit stop on this, hit 5 star. That's literally the
Yes.
best way. 5 stars. And then find me at ihaveapodcast.com. Or I have a podcast where you listen to this podcast. Thanks so much. Daniel, have a great day. And I'll see you in the 5 star reviews too, buddy.
Please, thank you so much. Yes, people, let's support Mr. Vinny Potestivo because if you support him, more and more and more empowering episodes to come. So, Mr. Vinny, thank you so much for your time. Bodycon people, see you soon.